Thank you. I thank my colleague, Senator Lankford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Shambaugh, I want to ask you a little bit about the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. You would oversee that. Obviously, there's an area that's left out currently in oversight, and that's agriculture. The Department of Agriculture is not sitting at the table, not helping make some of those decisions. There's a tremendous amount of investment that's coming from non-market economies to the United States in agriculture. I want to get your opinion on that, whether that needs to be included. That becomes a policy issue for us that we've got to be able to correct, but it's also a preference issue for you as well.
Thank you, Senator. I think security of food and our supply chains there, and the way to make sure that we're getting food safely from farm to table in the United States is incredibly important. I think honestly, as to whether the Department of Agriculture should be part of CFIUS or not is a question for Congress. It's not something certainly I would want to weigh in directly. I can say that I had the opportunity when I was on staff at the CEA to work at times on CFIUS. The professionals there are incredibly dedicated and take that job incredibly seriously, and I think would take the input that Congress thinks they should be taking.
Do you think that is a need at this point?
Without talking to the Assistant Secretary there or to the terrific staff there, it's a little hard for me to know to what extent they feel they can get what they need from the Department of Agriculture under the current setup by asking questions. Right. When it comes to the national security aspects, it was always, at least in my experience, the intelligence agencies and national security agencies would brief the rest of the committee as to whether a transaction was a risk. They may feel they can get that by just going and asking Department of Agriculture, or they may feel it would be helpful to have agriculture in the room. I can't speak to that.
Okay, we'll follow up on them in the days ahead. Be interested in your strategy and trying to be able to coordinate with the executive directors of IMF, World Bank, the IDB, trying to be able to get a more consistent policy set and to be able to make sure it's consistent with our national foreign policy. And obviously, I want to deal with some of the issues of China and how they're trying to affect some of those entities as well and what they're doing. What's your perspective on that?
I would say, as I think this administration has often spoken, we are in many ways in a competition with China. And I don't think that's strictly an economic competition around given sectors. I think it's also a competition for a different vision of how the global economy should be organized. And I think a large part of that for the United States is effectively using the international financial institutions and the multilateral development banks, because we see a world where institutions and the rule of law and transparency and accountability are important. And to me, those are institutions we should use very effectively. If I were confirmed to this position, I would take very seriously my engagement with the executive directors and try to make sure that we are always carrying out presenting a good alternate option to engaging with China for countries, whether it's in loans or other sorts of engagement, to make sure that that example always sat there of high standards, accountability, transparency, and really holding to our values in our economic diplomacy.
Yeah, with the World Bank, obviously China has graduated under their standards from being a developing country, yet they are still listed as a developing country. That time period wanes in about 3 more years at this point, and then they're going to ask for a renewal without question on that. Is that something that should be renewed for China as a developing country under World Bank standards?
My understanding, Senator, is you're absolutely correct that based on income levels, China has graduated past the normal view of a loan-eligible country. I know it is a complicated process when countries graduate. It doesn't happen kind of strictly based on the income cutoff. My understanding is back in 2018, the World Bank stated that they would start moving in this direction. It's something that I would spend a lot of time on because I think it's an important issue.
It is an important issue, and China doesn't need to stay as a developing country. Special drawing rights and that kind of authority being given to country, do you think that the special drawing rights given to country should be given to them so then they could then pay back Belt and Road Initiative loans back to China?
I think we would want to make sure that any funds that are going to poorer or emerging market countries are not being used to simply rechannel them towards China, and so that's something we would pay attention to.
I would agree on that. So that's one we need to be able to engage in. This tax conversation that's happening, you had used the term less of a race to the bottom earlier on tax policy. My concern is Twofold. One is other countries seem to be more informed of what's happening in the negotiation than Congress is, and Congress is going to have to speak on this. We get to read about the negotiations. Other countries actually get to participate in it. I think that's a problem, and that needs to be corrected with just consultation and information, not after the fact. The second part of this is this race to the bottom on the tax piece on it has a huge gap in it that is not just the tax rate on it, but it's also other countries that subsidize are excluded from that. So it's not really a race to the bottom on tax policy, it's a race to the bottom on subsidies. There's a very large problem in all of this negotiation that seems to be left out in this. I'm trying to figure out where this is going to go, and if you agree with this, that basically the current policy that we have in the United States on credits, other countries get to just not count their subsidies, but our credits are. So you're talking about trying to change American tax policy to match more of Europe's tax policy when they get a chance to waive it. Is that a problem? Because it looks like a very different race to the bottom that's happening.
Senator, I would say that I'm not in the building yet, and so obviously I was not part of the negotiation, so I also don't know a great deal about some of the specifics yet. In terms of the question of subsidies versus different types of credits, all I would say is that, you know, if I were confirmed, I would certainly intend to consult with and engage with Congress carefully on the issue to make sure that any agreement that is being struck or any details that are being finalized are being done in a way that makes sense with other policies Congress has in mind.
Well, just keeping Congress engaged in that would be helpful. Thank you.
I thank my colleague, and I just want him to know that I look forward to working with him on this whole issue of global taxation. Clearly, what we're looking for is a way to ensure that we're competitive in these tough global markets so that we promote job creation. And as you heard me to say, what I'm particularly concerned about is tax avoidance, because we have seen, particularly with AbbVie, and I'm concerned about the possibility of Merck and Abbott doing exactly the same thing, some really flagrant cases. So I appreciate my colleague being interested in this whole area, and I look forward to working with him.